I'm very excited to announce that I have finished making the dummy book that I've been trying to make for the past 4 years. So for my MA, the final module that I needed to do was called the final major project, and for that I chose to write an illustrated children's book. As you know, this is a dream that I've had for about 4 years pretty much, and I've finally managed to do it. All it took was about 6 months of very hard work. So this is my book as it has been just printed off at the local convenience store. I'm not going to show too much of the work here because I will be trying to approach publishers with this. If you're Walker Books or Orchard Books, give me a call. But I will try to talk about the process of making the book, and I would also like to show a bit of the work that went into it. So I had this aim of writing and illustrating a children's book, but where do you begin? There are so many books out there, so even if you look at other children's books for guidance on how to format the book, there's sort of so much variety that it's really hard to see what is the standard, if that makes sense. So I went with the common knowledge, I guess, that an illustrated book normally works out at 32 pages. So that gives 24 illustrated pages, or 12 spreads, plus 2 end paper illustrations, I guess, inset illustrations, and the cover. Books are normally bound in multiples of 4, I believe, so you could add on more spreads than that. But I figured that since I don't really know what I'm doing, I would start out simple. So that's what I decided to do. I did 12 spreads, 2 inset illustrations and the cover. Around January or February I started writing the script for the book. So the target age range for my book is ages 6 to 8, and the book is based on a collection of letters that I exchanged with my parents when I was about 6 years old. So I wanted to use the letters themselves in the book as far as possible, since I still have the collection of letters. And I think that being able to use the letters as part of the illustrations adds a lot of charm to the book. So I started thinking about ways that I could incorporate the letters themselves into the script. I did that by going through all of the letters and picking up the ones that I thought had sort of story potential, I guess, and then weaving a plot together out of those. The themes that I was looking at were loneliness and friendship, which I think are quite sort of universal themes, especially friendship. I think we see a lot in children's books. So I started trying to sort of hash out a script for about 2 or 3 months at the beginning of 2020. And my aim was that the script should be under 1,000 words, and that it should be satisfying, because there are sometimes, you know, you get to the end of a book and you think, hang on, what happened there? And I wanted to sort of avoid that. I wanted to create a book which has a sort of wholesome quality and a sort of fulfilling ending. Hopefully I've done that, I don't know, we shall see. So once the letters were transcribed and I picked up the ones I wanted to use, I went about trying to sort of get my ideas for spreads down on paper. So I would do stuff like this, just have a passage in the book and try to sort of work out how the page should be laid out. In the end, the actual images that I created didn't really look like this. But for example, in this page, the girl is sort of looking out of her window, and the bottom spread actually was quite similar to the final illustration that I ended up doing. Here we go. So that's what the final illustration looked like. So the girl is sort of looking out of her window at night. One big issue that I had with trying to make the book was formatting. So I looked at other books for inspiration about how I should lay out this book. However, the ones that I own, I think that they're kind of unusual formatting, a lot of them. So for example, I've got Hello Lighthouse here by Sophie Blackall, which is a wonderful book, I really recommend it. And it's got a very sort of long and thin design, but I think that the design of the book really fits the theme of the lighthouse. And in my book, there were going to be lots of garden scenes, so I didn't really want a book which was more sort of up and down. I wanted a book that would open out a little bit wider. So I thought about the formatting of this glorious book, Shakespeare's The Tempest, illustrated by Jane Ray. It's absolutely stunning, it's really gorgeous. But when you open it out, you realise that the book is actually larger than A3. And when I was considering how big to make the artwork, as a general rule, you should make the artwork larger and scale down. But I couldn't do that because everything that I own is small. So I have a light box, but it's A4 size. I have a printer, but it's A4 size. And the largest scanner and copier that I have access to is A3. So basically, if I were to make the artwork larger than A3, it would be sort of such a faff to get it scanned, you know, to copy it. So I was sort of bound by the materials and the equipment that I had access to, and ultimately I made the book 42 centimetres wide by 27 centimetres high. So that works out at a page size of 21 centimetres across and 27 centimetres down. When you open the book, it's A3 size, but it's a little bit narrower than A3. And I think that that's given me sort of enough space for these kind of expansive garden illustrations. The next issue that I had was materials. So a lot of books these days are illustrated using a mixture of digital and traditional media. And a lot of books are also illustrated using solely digital media. So that means where you make the image entirely on a computer via a screen or a tablet using a pencil, and you know, like Apple Pencil and iPad, or Wacom Cintiq. Now I know that is easier for editing, and it's also easier for sort of sharing the manuscript. You can make infinite changes, and that's also wonderful. But once again, I have a 15-inch MacBook Pro, and 15 inches sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. So I found it very difficult to sort of gauge the size of the illustration and get a sense of how it would look when I was working on this sort of 15-inch screen. So I sort of found myself being drawn to work on paper, which is what I did for all of the preliminary sketches that went into the book. So I sort of found that I was much more able to visualise the whole size of the book when I was working at the full size that it would be printed. And I think that being able to sort of gauge the size of the book relative to the text really helped me sort of get over my layout issues. So ultimately I was bound by my materials and the equipment that I had access to. But I think that this worked out really well because it also pushed me to illustrate the book using traditional media. So I illustrated the book using coloured pencil, which I think has given a really nice soft quality. And I'm really happy with how the illustrations have come out. So as you can see in this illustration, I left quite a lot of space on the page for text, and I've made sure that I work into the images enough that when they're scanned, they should maintain most of their colour. So the nice thing about making the entire image on one sheet of paper is that the editing that you need to do afterwards is fairly minimal. So my sort of normal technique for working is that I will make different elements of the image on different sheets of paper, then scan them into the computer and combine them to make the final image. However, that's actually pretty time consuming because whilst you have the security of working on different sheets of paper, when you scan the image into the computer, you have to faff around like crazy to get rid of the background of the image, you know, put it all together, make sure that it's all sort of adjusted, you know, that it doesn't, that the parts look cohesive as a whole. And I did the first spread of the book like that, but it actually came out really bad. Also, when you work digitally, because you have the backlighting of the screen, it's very easy to make things overly dark by accident. And so when you print off the finished image, you may discover that it's actually much darker than the image that you were looking at on the screen. And I think that that certainly happened to me with the first round of test prints that I did for the first couple of spreads. So I think that the decision to illustrate the book using traditional media, in this case coloured pencil, really worked well. Once I had finished all of the illustrations on paper, I took them to the local convenience store, because I live in Japan, and scanned them all in at A3. I scanned them in at 400 dpi, which was the highest setting that the machines at the convenience store will do, and I set about sort of editing them. So the kind of edits that I did were things like removing dust or little specks of dirt that had got onto the illustration. Also, in some cases, I would move elements of the illustration. So, for example, on this page, the snowdrops were actually in the way of the text, so I had to move them down. You can move things sort of easily in Photoshop using the content-aware move tool, and you can take away sort of little specks of dirt using the spot correction tool. So both of those were very, very useful for me. So once I had this sort of scanned artwork, which had been edited and was ready to have text added to it, I set about doing that. One of the sort of labour-saving things that I did when I was putting the images and the text together was to create linking files in InDesign. So what I did was I created the book in InDesign with using facing pages and the correct number of spreads that I needed to make the book the correct length. And then I made the InDesign pages, I formatted them also to 42 centimetres by 27 centimetres, which is the same size as my spreads. And for every spread I made an individual Photoshop file. So I would also format the Photoshop file to 42 centimetres by 27, and then put my illustration into the Photoshop file, do the sort of little edits that I needed to do, and then when the edits were basically done, I would go back to InDesign and then link the file. So not only can you link images, but you can also link entire Photoshop files, which is what I did. So you press Ctrl-D, go and find your PSD file, and you put it into the InDesign file. Then every time that you update the Photoshop file, InDesign will give you a little yellow warning icon when you look at the links panel, and that means that the Photoshop file has been updated. So if you double click the little yellow icon, the exclamation mark icon, then you will update the file in InDesign, and the updates from the Photoshop file will be carried over to the InDesign file. So that means that you can have your book collected together in InDesign, and any edits that need to be done you can just do very, very easily and very quickly. My Mac struggled a lot with it, so I think the more powerful computer that you have, the better it will be and the easier it will be to lay out the files. So I kept all of my text in a Word document. For every spread in InDesign that I created, I would add the appropriate text over. So even though I planned the layout of the book and how the text would run page to page quite early on, when I actually came to put the book together in InDesign, it became apparent that there were places where the flow of the text didn't really work, or places where I hadn't left quite enough space on the page for the text that I thought I needed. Add to this the letters that the book is based on. I decided that to preserve the childlike quality of the letters, I wanted to use the letter text as it had been handwritten. So I went about trying to sort of take the backgrounds off the letter text and use the text only in the book as the text that the child would write. However, because the paper is now pretty aged, so I was writing this when I was 6 and I'm now late 20s, the paper was not great quality, and that meant that I couldn't really pick up the writing very well. Often it was written in pencil and just the contrast wasn't great. So instead of that, I moved over to the iPad. I use Procreate on iPad, which is very, very good for doing sort of precise drawing. So I would take, I had scanned all of the letters and I brought the letters into the iPad and opened them in Procreate, and from Procreate I could trace over the child's handwriting and save the file as a PNG, which is a transparent file where there is no background. So then I could import the PNG file into the Photoshop document, then update the InDesign linked document to show the final spread, which included the child's text as it was handwritten. This was really good because it also allowed me to edit for some of the spellings. Some of them are hilarious and needed to stay, but some of them are sort of incomprehensible and needed to definitely go. So that was also a really good opportunity to kind of edit the letters sensitively, and also raise the contrast of the image and raise the clarity of the messages themselves. So I think that was also really, really helpful. After the book was finished, I exported the whole thing as a PDF, and I went to the local convenience store again to print off the books as I had formatted it. So for example, there's the spread from before, and you can see I've added the text in around the image. I'm actually really, really happy with how it's turned out. So I will, from September 2020, I will be looking for publishers, and I imagine I think there's a degree of luck to finding a publisher, but you know, if the material is good enough, hopefully somebody will be interested in it. I imagine that after that there will be some more edits to go into the book if it's picked up, and if it isn't, I will take this as a brilliant learning experience and move on to the next project. Because I think certainly I learned an awful lot through doing this. So here's one of the last spreads in the book. I will be sharing bits of the images from now on. If nothing else, this is perhaps helpful to other people who are doing the final major project for the Falmouth MA Illustration online course. I'm the first cohort to be doing the final module ever. So I started the Falmouth MA Illustration course in 2018, and I am just coming up to graduation now, nearing September 2020. So it's been quite a ride, and I think that I can honestly say that writing and illustrating my own very first dummy book is a massive achievement, which I am incredibly proud of. So I hope that everybody else, you know, if you've got a project that you're waiting to do and that you've been sitting on for a while, just go for it and see what you can achieve. Because it's just being able to sort of hold this in my hands and look at it is pretty satisfying, I have to say. Alright, so that's all for now. If you have any questions about I don't know, how to make a children's book, I'm not exactly an authority on it, but I think this recent experience did help me sort of kind of get to understand what the whole thing is about a little bit. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will be back with some updates about my work after graduating, hopefully, from the MA in September. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful week. Bye bye.